This is gonna be a crazy one. Welcome back to another Reddit video. Today we're gonna be looking at stories from people who came incredibly close to death. These stories range from terrifying home invasions to encounters with wild animals and other situations where the chances of survival seemed terribly slim. With that being said, grab a snack, get comfortable, and shut the blinds. Let's dive in. This incident happened about 5 years ago. It's a story that I never really tell anymore. Most people don't understand how your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door, and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some things around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habit for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyways. I haven't forgotten to lock the door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier before work. My front door opened and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I happily called out to him, "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out into my living room kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me. I would estimate 50s, but it's hard for me to recall exact facial features or any details from this moment. He was just standing there, staring at me. No mask, no weapon. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave, but as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at this stranger in my house. I stood taller, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a loud, clear voice telling him to get out of my apartment, and that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me like I hadn't even spoken. Then he began to pick up my things. My cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me that this person was dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward towards the only other device I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back towards the bathroom because it was the only place I could go. I put 2 locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds, I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it up. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell them there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice as to how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen. With fear, with shock, I don't know, but I didn't try to scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die because I just knew that that's what was going to happen. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come to help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet I could have used to defend myself with. Even the laptop I had would have hurt if I swung it at someone. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that. But the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator and cabinets being flung open as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort and to tell her how much I love her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through knowing that her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I loved them, to help my husband through whatever happened next, if it ended badly for me. The intruder started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked out towards the living room kitchen area again, where the front door was located, and I opened the door and darted from my closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling, at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that, but from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just always seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of the apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report, telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time, or blaming me for what happened, but later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. Now, I don't know about you, but I was gripped to my seat the entire time I read that story for the first time. The user went on to explain how the experience affected them over the years, and that eventually they went to a martial arts school to take self-defense classes. Honestly, although this was definitely a very traumatic experience for her, it seems to have ended on a good note with her feeling much more confident after taking those classes. About 2 weeks ago, I was walking home along a dark road. I live in the tropical forests of Colombia. I had a headlamp on and was playing some music and singing along to keep myself company, since it was an hour-long walk. I reached the halfway point, making sure to keep my eye out for snakes crossing the road, and I hear this rustle in the bushes behind me. I turn around, and I see two large glowing eyes and the outline of a feline face about 3 feet off the ground, staring at me, motionless. I realize that I am looking at a jaguar, and I am instantly terrified. I am alone. I am female and rather small. This thing is about 10 to 12 feet away from me and could easily leap that far to take me out. I have no time to pick up a rock or a stick to defend myself. I do the only thing that my brain is screaming at me to do. I don't run away. I make myself as large as possible, yell as loudly and as gutturally as possible, and charge at the jaguar. The jaguar decides it has miscalculated the threat potential of this prey. I count on the fact that they will avoid a fight that could potentially injure them, as an injury in the jungle could mean that they are unable to hunt, and therefore might kill them in the end. Miraculously, it turns tail and takes off into the bush. I know full well that this is a major predator and that it could very well stalk me along the edge of the road. It takes me a few minutes to gain up the courage to turn around to expose my back. I picked up a bunch of rocks and a stick. I kept making the roars as I made the rest of the petrifying walk back home. I would shine my flashlight into the edge of the forest and back along the road I had been traveling every 5 seconds or so, just looking for those glowing eyes. My foot has blisters on it. I roll my ankle because I'm not looking where I'm going. I ignore the pain and just keep walking. I throw rocks at suspicious-looking shadows, roaring every now and again. It was a harrowing 30-minute walk home. I was 20 and on my way to work on a Saturday morning. I had a 95 Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Driving behind me was a mid-2000s Chevrolet Impala. He was swerving all over the road. He'd get right up on my bumper, swerve, fall behind, swerve, speed up, repeat. I tried to ignore him and kept driving, which was my first mistake. Eventually, he fell out of sight. I finally came up to the parking lot, which is just over the crest of a hill and on the left. I'm waiting for traffic to clear to make the left turn. I have my wheels turned already so I can hit the gas and get into the parking lot, which was my second mistake. While I'm waiting, I see something fast come up behind me in my rear view. It's the Impala absolutely flying up at me. I didn't even have time to say, "Oh shit," when the lights went out. I woke up on a stretcher being carried out of an ambulance in the worst pain of my life. I felt like someone was sitting on my chest as I couldn't breathe. Then, lights out again. I wake up one more time in what I think is a hospital, then I was out again. I finally regained full consciousness in a hospital bed with a chest tube in my right side, an IV in my left arm, a neck brace on, and excruciating pain in my chest, head, and neck. My parents were both there, and one of the first things I remember saying was, "My car's totaled, isn't it?" The Impala driver had fallen asleep behind the wheel and pressed fully on his accelerator pedal. He hit the rear end of my car at an estimated 75 miles per hour. Because I had my wheels turned, I was pushed into oncoming traffic where a brand new Toyota RAV4 then smashed into my passenger door at an estimated 50 miles per hour, causing my car to whiplash around in the opposite direction it was rolling. The impact was so hard, it tore my rear wheel off and sent it a quarter mile down the road. They found parts of my rear brakes in a tree. The passenger door was touching the center console. The front bolts for my seat had sheared out of the floor. I suffered 6 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a severely sprained neck, a nasty concussion, a perforated eardrum, and various other relatively minor abrasions. Aside from the half-deafness in my left ear, newfound motion sickness, and occasional neck stiffness, I'd say I made a full recovery. When I was 14, my cousin and I found my uncle's gun stash in his closet. My cousin grabbed a pistol and pointed it at my head with his finger on the trigger. I quickly told him to stop and that wasn't funny. He glared at me and told me it's not loaded, while he pointed it at the floor and pulled the trigger. The gun was loaded, and it blew a huge hole through the floor. I think about this a lot. I brought it up to my cousin, and he started to cry. That experience cut us both deep. My roommate killed an intruder in his entryway. Had a guy walk up to the open door midday and walk into the house. The windows were large, and the guy could clearly see inside that my roommate and his adult sister were inside. He entered the house anyway. After confronting the guy, it became apparent that he wasn't confused and deliberately entered. My roommate tackled him and managed to pin him down through a struggle. He yelled for his sister to grab a gun. His sister brought it back, and he held it against the guy till he calmed down, with him fully aware that he had a gun pressed to his side. My roommate disentangles himself slowly and gets some distance, backing up around 10 feet. His sister is calling the cops at this point. The guy stands up and faces my roommate, who's clearly pointing a gun at him. He gets aggressive again and starts moving towards my roommate and reaches into his jacket pocket. My roommate proceeds to unload and drop the guy on the spot. Police arrive and clear the situation. The shooting was ruled self-defense. I believe the guy was found to be heavily under the influence, but I'm not sure exactly. He ended up struggling heavily with PTSD from this event, as well as other follow-on events in the military. Heavy shit. It's honestly more depressing than anything when something like this happens. In many cases, the aggressor doesn't even seem to be in their right mind, which may have been the case here. In other cases, they're just horrible people, and even if the victim comes out on top, they have to live with that and their decisions that they made in that moment, constantly replaying them throughout their entire lives. This next one, although terrifying, is also just kind of ridiculous. I was a clerk at an appliance repair shop. Some guy had brought his riding lawnmower in to be worked on, but decided it cost too much to have it repaired, so my boss asked me to load it up in our lift truck and drive it to his address. I was 17 and had my newly minted license on me, so it felt like a big responsibility, and I was happy to do it. I loaded it up just fine and drove to his address. When I started to unload it, I noticed that the battery was unattached. One of the technicians must have removed it to work on it or something. Unfortunately, I had no tools to put it back in. I checked the work order and it said, "Customer declined repair, needs replacement engine." So I thought, well, I guess he won't care because the engine is dead anyway. I rang the doorbell and this huge drunk guy with no shirt opens the door suddenly. I had lowered the riding mower off the lift truck and had pushed it onto his yard. He yells, "What the hell are you leaving that pile of junk in my yard for?" I said, "Is this not your riding lawnmower?" He says, "Hell yes, it's mine, but it's in pieces, and I don't want the damn thing. What the fuck is wrong with you people?" So I apologize and ask him if he wanted me to load it back up. For some unknown reason, this pissed him off even more, and he disappeared back into his house. I go back to the truck to radio my boss, this was back in the days before cell phones, to see what he wanted me to do. In the meantime, that drunk bastard stomps out onto his porch with a shotgun, leveled it at the truck, and pulled the trigger. The windshield shattered, and I literally couldn't hear anything but ringing from the noise. I jumped in the truck, started it up, put it in reverse, and floored it out of his driveway, almost going into the ditch on the other side of the road. He fires again, this time hitting the passenger side of the truck near the door, blowing shrapnel into the cab of the truck, which hit my leg and cut me a bit. I flew back to work faster than I had ever driven before, calling my mom and dad, and told my boss I was never coming back to work there again. The cops came and took my statement, arrested the dumbass, and I had to testify against him a few months later, despite desperately never wanting to see him again. He only spent about 6 months in prison for it. Luckily, by the time things were settled, I had moved away to college and didn't have to worry about him anymore. I was 13 years old. My friend and I were out skateboarding, and for some reason, this one woman got really angry that we skated on the sidewalk in front of her house. She began screaming incoherently, and we just laughed it off and kept going. Shortly thereafter, I'm riding on the sidewalk to get back to my house when all of a sudden, the woman yelling from before pulls up beside me in her car and starts screaming again. Full disclosure, I replied with some expletives and told her to go away. I continued riding, and she just drove slowly beside me while continuing to scream. The woman eventually drove off, but then she did a U-turn and came back towards me. I expected her to just pass by and go home, but then I noticed she was actually driving directly at me. I froze and just watched her car come at me. Eventually, my brain decided I had to move. It was literally like a movie, and I dove away just as the car drove over where I was standing. I don't know her exact speed, but if I had to guess, it was 30 to 40 miles an hour. She just continued driving, and I sprinted home. She was later arrested and pled guilty to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. My boyfriend Jay and I were staying with two of his friends, Jim and Jeremy. Jeremy had left the apartment an hour or so before Jay and I decided to go to bed. A few minutes after Jay fell asleep, I heard a knock on the door, and Jim answered it. Turns out it was Jeremy, but he wasn't alone. Two guys that also lived in the apartment building forced him to knock at the door so that they could force their way in, as he didn't have his keys with him. Once they were inside, I could hear what sounded like a scuffle from where I was in the bedroom with the door closed. I woke Jay up, and all of a sudden, we hear two unknown voices yelling, "Get down! Get the fuck on the ground!" Jay wanted to see what was going on, but I begged him to stay in the bedroom with me, which he did. After what seemed like a couple minutes of arguing and fighting, everything went absolutely silent. We opened the bedroom door to see Jim laying on the ground with what we later found out to be a barbed machete sticking out of his chest. Jeremy was calling 911. The apartment building didn't have a buzzer to let anyone into the building, so when the police got there, Jay let them in and showed them to the suite we were in. After that, they separated us all and put the three of us into the back of 3 different police cars, where they left us while the paramedics tried to save Jim. Unfortunately, they weren't able to save him. He died at the apartment. I knew he was dead when the paramedics wheeled him out to the ambulance, but didn't leave for at least 5 minutes without working on him at all. The police took us to be questioned, again keeping us separated the entire time. About 12 hours later, they were ready to let us go, but told us that we weren't allowed to go back in the apartment as it was an active crime scene. We were dropped off by the police at a coffee shop with no money, phones, wallets, or even shoes on our feet, as they wouldn't let us take anything from the apartment before they put us in the police cars. We ended up going to a friend's house where we stayed until we were let back into the apartment 4 or 5 days later. Once we were finally allowed back inside, the first thing I had to do was clean up the blood, which I'm sure you can imagine was pretty hard to handle. It was pretty traumatic. I want to read a short string of replies that sat below this post, as it gives a little bit more insight into the aftermath of the attack. You can always tell the true stories when the cops are shitty to everyone. Yeah, it felt like we were treated like criminals for no reason, and then to just be left somewhere with no money and they couldn't care less, it was like a slap in the face. I want to make a lighthearted joke about the cops leaving you, but I'm too upset that all of their effort was spent on making this traumatic experience even more traumatic and impossible to deal with. You get the utmost of props for convincing your boyfriend to stay in the room with you. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm so proud of you for surviving. Thank you. I've often questioned if we could have saved Jim, which is a horrible thing to have to live with, but I also think if he would have left the bedroom, he would have ended up getting stabbed too. I was traveling in the Philippines in northern Luzon. That's the part always hit hard by typhoons. It was just the beginning of rainy season. I was in Banao and was planning to go up north to Sagada the next day, Saturday. The Lonely Planet writes about this route as, quote, the scariest road in the world. It's solid mountain on one side and deep on the other. There was a jeepney, a small public bus, scheduled in the morning and one in the afternoon. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm not a morning person, and if there is a later option, I'm definitely taking that one. On a whim, the night before, I decided to leave earlier and take the 8 a.m. Jeep. Super out of character for me, and I'm still not sure why I did it. A few days later, on another bus, I chatted with this nice lady, and she asked me what places in the Philippines I've been to so far. And she says, "Oh my god, have you heard about the jeepney accident on Saturday afternoon on that road between Banao and Sagada?" So, apparently the jeepney I planned to take came upon a mountain slide, lost control, and went down the side of the mountain. 10 people died. No one survived. And that's the end of today's stories. I hope you guys enjoyed. I just want to say I'm sorry that I'm always seemingly in a different filming location, or I'm always changing my room around. I am actually in the process of moving out of New York City and going back to my hometown, so I am kind of all over the place. I don't have a stable setup, so things are going to be a little bit hectic for maybe another month or so, and then I hope to have like a really nice new setup for you guys, so I think that'll be pretty cool. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and let me know in the comments what other kinds of stories you'd like to see in the future.